Yeah, no, just funny little pieces. It's just that one of the things was that he wanted, he liked smoking cigars, which I mentioned before, and it caused a lot of sickness for him. But he had said, he made some quotes that were kind of, I think, stupid quotes. I read about them. My son's into cigars, so I heard this quote. He said how, like, a cigar is better than a woman because a cigar is totally reliable enjoyment, and a woman you can't be sure of. Well, I don't know the exact quote, but it's like, well, it certainly wouldn't be acceptable today. But it's a much more aggressive stance or impulsive stance. So, like, the Venus flirtation and Aries, the impulsiveness, but the lack of patience, lack of satisfaction, lack of contentment, and the irritation that comes out of that kind of showed in that Venus in the sixth house in Aries. When he puts expectations of appreciation, like his appreciation goes into Young's second house. It's like his values, his appreciation goes into, so the second house. So Young gained financially from the appreciation. So it hit conjuncted his Venus, squared his Sun, squared Jupiter. Even though the understanding was different, there was still a belief that it was beneficial coming from that, but there was stress there. Whereas Young's Venus, like of appreciation, went into the understanding of the ninth house of understanding of light, and he had his own take on how things were right. His Venus was valuing the emotional and the Cancer side of it, whereas Freud's Venus was valuing the sexual side of the Aries side of it. So some of these get complicated. We'd have to take more time to divide it apart. We're just going through the steps. Good. Okay. So the Mars, Young's Mars, is in his 11th house of doing things with friends in Sag. Let's go here. Let's go there. Let's show. There was an ability to want to go out and meet people, do things, be places. Okay. That's social, to impress other people, to act on understanding, to teach, to be on the road, talking to people. I mean, he wrote books, he traveled, he was on media, with TV. He really expanded. He pushed to expand. There's no aspects affecting his Mars. Whereas Freud's Mars is opposed by Jupiter, which means, and squared by Saturn. So he has a contradiction. Mars opposed Jupiter is almost warlike, too aggressive, too competitive, and Saturn is too competitive and then restricted by Saturn. So he has the discipline, the control, but it's really aggressive, but it's repressed. And it can allow a lot of work to get accomplished, but it's a totally different attitude than a Mars and Sag in 11th house. They both had their Mars in the 11th house. Mars and Sag and Young's, let's travel, let's go place. Sure, I'll go on a trip to America with you. Sure, I'll lecture with you. We'll do that. Freud's, we have to get it's in Libra. Mars is a detriment. It's detriment in Libra. It's in the sites where it could be decisive, and it's over-aggressed, over-sexed, and over-restricted. So he has these very repressed, harsh elements. So his energy of his Mars, he does things with discipline, with strength, with control. We're going to America, we're going to do this. And Young saying, okay, I'll go along. Sure, I'll go along. And they were both working the same conferences or places they went together. But in the end, they weren't exactly saying exactly the same thing. It kind of wore them apart from each other. This was the beginning of them separating from each other. But Freud's Mars in his own 11th house went into the 8th house of shared resources, of doing things together. 8th house, the social conscience of Young. So he would do things, and Young could see the sexuality, the energy of Mars, and the implications of it, the social implications of it. Whereas Young's Mars went into the 2nd house of Freud, and Freud could see the values or the expenses. Like, he was trying to make it go along, but it was a challenge to the expenses of him going along and what it was going to cost, what he was going to do, what were the values of having him there. And as his Mars went into the 2nd house of Freud, it opposed his Saturn, it squared his Neptune, opposed his Moon. He didn't exactly feel right about it. It didn't feel, his energy did not go properly. He didn't reinforce Freud in the way that Freud expected. Freud was very disciplined and controlled in his own way, but his energy wasn't being matched here at all. His energy, it really was, he was in another place, he spaced out. So this was driving very differently. The understanding, his outlook and his philosophy, his understanding, Freud's was in the 9th house. Understanding opposing Mars and Saturn, squaring Saturn, so understanding what's too much, what's not too much, what's right, what's wrong. It's good business instinctive way, but there was a need to understand the sexuality and understand the need for limits or just restraints on it. With Freud, with Jung, he had his Jupiter in Libra, in the 8th house of shared resources, but it was squared Venus, so his was a much more indulgent understanding the excesses of too much satisfaction, too much love. If you with your wife, you got your wife, but if the secretary loves you, you'd say no. He had the understandings around emotional scenarios and struggles with that. This built up so when he was older, he wanted to live in a tower and hide away so he wouldn't have the guilts or have to have those guilts come up into his face. He would just live in a tower of his own accomplishments, which he did. Saturn, discipline, respect, father, authority. Jupiter's, Freud's Saturn is in the 8th house, social responsibility, serious about commitments, sharing, sexuality, who's being responsible for what, having kids, who's taking care of what, all of these things, Saturn in the 8th house. And it's in Gemini, so it's a very somewhat independent take, but still in Gemini, it's squaring Saturn and Jupiter. So he had a sense of his own take on how he could see the effects of Mars and a right or wrong understanding, who's doing things, who's not doing things. So his Mars, Jupiter's, Saturn's T-square really was the essence of what he could see in other people, what other people would mess up if they didn't control it, if they used it too much. He would see these things in others and be able to say, well, you're over the line here. That's his Saturn in the 8th house. So concern about shared resources. He was responsible. He had his 5 kids. They lived in the same house. They were responsible around those things. But his Saturn went into the 5th house of Jung, which is the love life, the kids, the Saturn. So the 5th house and opposed his Mars. So his discipline and his efforts were naturally being opposed by Jung. Jung's instincts and he was not going the same way. The restraints were being set or the work was being done. For Jung, his Saturn is in the 1st house. He identified the Saturn to the father, and it squared Pluto in the middle. It was a threatening, a confronting identification. Likewise, for his own identity, he would be very serious and confronting with who he is. He had a very serious image of himself, the educated, the knowledgeable one. When he put the knowledgeable one into Freud's chart, it went into his 4th house, into his roots and his motivations. And it squared his Mercury, it squared his Uranus, and opposed the midheaven. So really, Freud was not listening or necessarily giving respect to Jung's sense of respect and identity. I'll just leave that there. The shocking Uranus, the excitement. Freud had Jung as excitement conjuncting Mars, conjuncting his Sun in the 7th house. So the exciting relations, the shocking ways, the different ways people can be, and how to make sudden, like this Freudian slip and aha, there's the thing, seeing things differently and being able to see how to get problems, how to solve things, how to relate to people. He had that eccentric side, that special insight of the Uranus. And that from his seeing that in relationships, it would go naturally into the 3rd house of Jung, which would cause a certain amount of excitement. It would stimulate, it would excite Jung. But Jung, it would excite him, it would conjunct his moon, he would pick it up immediately, but then it would bring up fears, he would have blocks about it. The squares Uranus, squares Saturn. So even though it's exciting, it was not, there was an inherent instability in that. He picked it up, the feelings, but it was like his excitement was taken personally by Jung, but then he was challenged by it. Freud's Uranus was squared his moon, so he has an instability, insecure about his past, his home, his family, his home. Like he talks about when he was young and he had nothing, but really when he had nothing, he was still substantially more secure than a lot of people. So, but he had an insecure home situation. The insecurity at home, Uranus squaring in the 7th house partnership. This meant the unstable partnership. Although he was married all his life, or he stayed, he was having an affair at the same time with it, and they were 2 separate worlds, the family and relationships. So here there's where it's how they're living and how they're doing this excitement, his type of excitement around shocking relationships. They both had Uranus in the 7th house. Okay, yet Jung had his son, both of them had their sun and Uranus in the 7th house. Both of them had an exciting, unconventional relationship, but Freud was more singular, more Taurian, and the Jung was a little bit more diversified and you could say gullible. But his excitement went into the 9th house, creating different outlook, trying to create a different understanding on Freud. Jung's Uranus went into Freud's 9th house, trying to change, make him see differently. Look, you can add the astrology, you can add these things. It isn't just this, it isn't just, and he was seeing it, the effect on the status. Eventually, he broke free on the status. Uranus conjuncted the midheaven. He broke free from, he gained status from being with Freud. And then he broke away to be on his own as soon as he could be on his own, and he gained and he got his freedom from that association with all the subsequent rights and wrongs from Freud's point of view. Freud's energy went into the 3rd house of the teaching and putting it out, putting all the special ideas out, Jung sucking it up, but not putting his own take on it. Okay. The Neptune, the belief, the fantasy, the delusion, the confusion. This is interesting story because it squares in Freud, it squares his moon, and his home life was a little bit more confusing, a little more clouded or confused, maybe guilt-ridden or evasive. He had his home, but he had his work, and they were like two separate things. But the Neptune was in the 4th house, so that's classically the skeletons and the closet aspect. There's something happened, some fantasy, some things that were unmentionable that went on there. We don't know. Okay, but that Neptune, that belief system, went into Jung's 1st house, and it squared the Mars. So Mars was fighting that belief system. It was expecting too much, that it would be the same with that. So that was so Freud's evasiveness was from something at home, from something deep within, in his fantasies and beliefs. So even though he was analyzing dreams and seeing them, it was very different than how Jung would work with them. So Jung has his Neptune, his belief in the 2nd house. It squares his sun as ascendant. So he values things. He married a rich person who took care of his finances all along the way. Neptune in the 2nd house. And but it squared his sun, and he did have affairs. So when he put his beliefs into Jung's, into the 6th house of his therapies, health, it conjuncted his Venus, it conjuncted his Pluto. That's not necessarily that bad. So his Neptune, he was able to show the dream to Freud, but Freud would be critical of the application of that. He would see the dream of how to heal, and Freud would not be interpreting it like that. I think he would be a bit more spaced out, was trying to get it more practical, more online with his teaching.